alone is my rock and my salvation. Put your trust always in the Lord. The Lord be with you. Let us pray. Blessed are you, Lord God, ruler of the universe and Lord of all life. Great and holy is your name in all the world, which you created according to your will. Establish your kingdom in our life and in our days. Quickly and speedily may your reign come with abundant peace from above, bringing life for us and for all people. Accept our prayers on behalf of your servant Michael. Grant him an entrance into the land of light and joy, that he may know the consolation of your peace and live forever in your eternal light. Mr. President, Mrs. Clinton, Mrs. Boorda and family, to the community of the United States Navy, and to all who are gathered with us on this day, civilian and military. In the name of God, I greet you, and I welcome you to this great church for national purpose, Washington National Cathedral. It is an honor to welcome you to this place where we gather as a nation to grieve, to honor our heroes, and to renew our faith. May God comfort and strengthen you as we sing the hymns and offer the prayers, as we offer words of remembrance of our great hero, Admiral Jeremy Michael Boorda. May God give you grace not only for this day, but strength for the days to come. Yes, God is present. Let us now hear the word of the Lord.
A reading from Isaiah. On this mountain, the Lord of hosts will make for all peoples a feast of rich food, a feast of well-aged wines, a feast of rich food filled with marrow, of well-aged wines strained clear. And he will destroy on this mountain the shroud that is cast over all peoples, the sheet that is spread over all nations. He will swallow up death forever. Then the Lord God will wipe away the tears from all faces, and the disgrace of his people he will take away from all the earth. For the Lord has spoken. It will be said on that day, Lo, this is our God. We have waited for him so that he might save us. This is the Lord for whom we've had waited. Let us be glad and rejoice in his salvation. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
O Lord, you have searched me and you know me.
You know when I rise. You perceive my thoughts afar.
You discern my going out and my lying down.
You are familiar with all my ways.
Before a word is on my tongue,
You know it completely.
you hem me in behind and before.
You have laid your hand upon me.
Such knowledge is too wonderful for me.
Too lofty for me to attain.
Where can I go from your spirit?
Where can I flee from your presence?
If I go up to the heavens, you are there.
If I make my bed in the depths, you are there.
If I rise on the wings of the dawn,
If I settle on the far side of the sea,
even there your hand will guide me.
your right hand will hold me fast.
If I say, surely the darkness will hide me,
And the light become night around me.
even the darkness will not be dark to you.
The night will shine like the day, or darkness is like it.
In Admiral Mike Boorda's passing, the nation has lost a great patriot, and the Navy has lost an outstanding captain. And oh, so tragically, a family has lost a dear husband, a treasured father, and a proud and doting grandfather. And I, the other Joint Chiefs, and so many others who have served beside him have lost a very special friend. Our paths first crossed when we both served in Europe. I was NATO's European commander, and Mike was the commander of NATO forces south of the Alps. Even then, most of our days were filled with the ongoing tragedy in Bosnia. Mike quickly became our expert, and I grew to value and to depend on his wisdom, his judgment, and to his friendship. And it was always a special treat when Joni and I would visit with Mike and Betty. Well, except once, when we were left alone in their home in Naples with their huge dog, Duke. I shall never forget that experience. Mike's brilliant performance in Europe made him a natural once it was time to select the next chief of naval operations. And so, for the last 2 years, we worked together once again, this time as members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Not surprisingly, he proved the right man to add wisdom and discipline to our deliberations and to help draw the Joint Chiefs together in a circle of friendship. And so we, the Joint Chiefs, have lost a very valued comrade. But although he was an excellent strategist, he will always be remembered as a sailor's sailor. To Mike, our great Navy was not a collection of ships or planes or submarines. It was, first and foremost, 400,000 magnificent men and women and their families. To Mike, the sum of our naval excellence was their talents, their dedication, and their courage. In his mind always were the faces of those men and women, his sailors, that he led so well. And he visited them laboring on flight decks, launching airplanes into harm's way. He saw them under the waves, standing a silent alert, and he watched them sailing year after year from one crisis to the next, away from home, protecting our nation with their selfless service and unequaled skill. He knew that his sailors were the finest in the world. He loved them and he led them with all his heart, and they sensing that in turn trusted, admired, and respected him. These past few years, even as the Navy has been sailing through rough seas, Mike never strayed from his course. While many could only talk of today's problems, Mike Boorda steered the Navy through the shoals, but always keeping the Navy's sights trained over the horizon into the 21st century. Because of him, the Navy has stayed the very best Navy in the world, bar none. And those of us who knew him and who knew him well, we are all the richer because we had Mike in our midst. And so, in words like those once used by Oliver Wendell Holmes, we pause here today not only for the sorrow at his loss, but also for the contagion of his courage, his dedication, and his character. And most of all, we reach out to you, Betty, and to your family. Fair winds and following seas, my friend. We'll miss you, Mike.
I met Mike Boorda in December of '93 on my first trip to the Mediterranean and Adriatic as secretary. He was serving as Commander-in-Chief of U.S. Naval Forces Europe and of Commander of Allied Forces Southern Europe. We met in Naples, and the next day visited a number of ships, going by helicopter from ship to ship, spending several hours on each one. Late in the afternoon, we arrived on the USS Monterey, a guided missile cruiser to remain overnight. As we toured the ship and got up to the bridge, Admiral Boorda said to the commanding officer, "Skipper, I'd like to do a man overboard drill." Obviously, the commanding officer said, "Sounds like a great idea, Admiral." And so someone took a life ring and tossed it overboard to starboard, and someone yelled, "Man overboard, starboard side." Mike Boorda said, "I've got the con," and he also went over to relieve the helmsman. So he's serving as conning officer and the helmsman. The drill gets underway. He barks, "All ahead full," and he took the helm and went to right full. He was going back and forth from the flying bridge to the helm, barking orders to the sailor who was manning the engine order telegraph, keeping his eye on that life ring. And with just a couple of minutes, he pulled that ship right alongside that life ring, and it was a masterful performance. He turned to me and said, "Okay, Mr. Secretary, you're next." I laughed and said, "No, thank you. I've just seen the work of a master." What a great ship handler he was. Just one of the reasons he was so admired by sailors. Walking around those ships with Mike Boorda was such a great experience. Sailors loved him. He understood them, all of them. Mess cooks, lookouts, from the junior and newly enlisted to the most senior. Whether they were chipping paint or swabbing decks, he made every one of them feel important, and that what they were doing had a major impact on the mission of that ship and making our Navy great and contributing to peace in the world. Recently, I was interviewing a newly selected admiral for a particular job, and I asked him which flag officer he admired the most. Without hesitation, he said, "Admiral Boorda." And I said, "Why?" He said, "Well, I worked for him when he was a battle group commander, and he always made people feel so good about themselves. He told us whenever we were asked to do something, we needed to try hard to find a way to say yes." That was Mike Boorda. I've seen Mike in a lot of different settings. I've seen him counsel a young petty officer. I've sat with him in the chief's mess or in the goat locker discussing issues with chief petty officers. I've been with him in the wardroom. I've seen him debate tough issues with the Joint Chiefs of Staff and other senior Pentagon officials. I've testified with him in front of Congress. I've seen him hosting foreign dignitaries from around the world. I met almost daily with him, either in my office or his office or some conference room in the Pentagon. I watched him brief the Secretary of Defense and offer advice to the President of the United States. In whatever situation I observed Mike Boorda, he was always the same person: well prepared, professional, competent, down to earth, charming, witty, clever, understanding, warm, yet tough. I've also seen the President of the United States take his advice. I remember one particular occasion. We were in Hawaii for the commemoration of the 50th anniversary of the end of World War II, VJ Day. The President and the CNO and I were on the sink-packed barge going across Pearl Harbor over to the Arizona Memorial. When the President turned to him and said, "Mike, what do you think we should do in Bosnia now?" Mike told the President what he thought, and within just a few weeks, we were in fact carrying out that recommendation, which ended up having all the parties at the peace table in Dayton, Ohio, and giving us a real chance for peace in Bosnia. John Walter Wayland describes the true gentleman. He describes him as the man whose conduct proceeds from goodwill and an acute sense of propriety, who does not make the poor man conscious of his poverty, the obscure man of his obscurity, or any man of his inferiority or deformity, who is himself humbled if necessity compels him to humble another, who does not flatter wealth, cringe before power, or boast of his own possessions or achievements, who speaks with frankness but always with sincerity and sympathy, and whose deed follows his word, who thinks of the rights and feelings of others rather than of his own, who appears well in any company, and who is at home when he seems to be abroad, a man with whom honor is sacred and virtue safe. That is Mike Boorda. He was the sailor's sailor. There is no greater tribute to pay him than that. For him to be remembered by that title is more than he could ever hope for. Mike loved his family. His late father, who he either called or wrote every week for 40 years, his mother, brother, and sister, his precious wife, Betty, his 4 wonderful children, and those grandchildren. How many times did he come in my office and say, "Mr. Secretary, I've got some new pictures"? They were always of his grandchildren. Many times from this lectern have the words of the prophet Micah been read. "O man, what does the Lord require of you? But to do justly, love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God." He tried to do just that. Those are powerful words. Do justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. Mike Boorda was a patriot, a leader, a warfighter and peacemaker, a planner, a superb tactician and brilliant strategist, a warm, caring sailor who loved those men and women in that Navy uniform. That's the Mike Boorda I will always remember. A man with a heart of gold and hands wrapped firmly around the true meaning of our effort to make the world a better, safer place. I'm lucky to have known him, and I am thankful for his friendship and his support. We have lost someone truly special. May God bless his life, bless his wonderful family, and bless his Navy that he loved.
A reading from Revelation. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. And I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride, adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne, saying, "See, the home of God is among mortals. He will dwell with them as their God. They will be his peoples, and God himself will be with them. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. Death will be no more. Mourning and crying and pain will be no more, for the first things have passed away." And the one who was seated on the throne said, "See, I am making all things new." Also, he said, "Write this, for these words are trustworthy and true." The word of the Lord.
President and Mrs. Clinton, Mrs. Boorda and family, and to all of you who love the Navy so much, before I lead our responsive reading, allow me to speak from the heart. I feel as if this is my last all-hands call with Admiral Boorda, and he has thrown me the mic one last time. I know we are here to honor, to remember, to support one another in mourning, but even in the majesty and splendor of this shrine, even in the midst of this august and powerful assembly, we could not properly honor or remember if we were not joined by sailors all around the globe, on flight decks and hangar bays, fantails and forecastles, on piers, and of course in every Navy chapel. Today and throughout the week, against backdrops as many and varied as the signal flags on a full-dress ship, with many voices, tears and prayers, we will together render the proper honors to our beloved CNO, Admiral Mike Boorda. He was the leader we longed for and looked to. He came from among us and rose so high, always remembering the lonely, insecure, frightened recruit, which all of us are in the beginning before we discover, as Admiral Boorda did, the Navy is a family. Our family has lost a man of true worth. The poet defined true worth as being, not seeming, as doing each day that goes by some little good and not dreaming of great things to do by and by. Our CNO went the poet many times better. He did each day not a little but much good, and he worked each day on great things which became realities quicker than anyone could believe possible. And all the while he envisioned even greater things to do by and by, and he shared his dreams with sailors. We will long remember Admiral Boorda for many great achievements, but I pray today we will also remember the details. He didn't just shake a sailor's hand. He gripped it and held it, and he drew energy from the encounter, even as he left the sailor with an indelible, lifelong memory of a moment with their CNO. When the bosun was finished piping, he always walked back through the side boys, shaking hands, patting shoulders, even exchanging high fives and tousling the hair of the rainbow side boys who lined his arrival at every ship we visited. He answered the same question as patiently and thoroughly at the end of the day as he did at the break of dawn, 7 ships and 7 helo rides earlier. At each stop, he listened, really listened. Standing on a destroyer flight deck with his arm around a troubled sailor, personally and privately counseling him, and then worrying on the plane hours later and directing follow-up, making everyone feel special. His schedule was so full, but he always found the time for one more sailor, never, ever saying no. He was, he is, and he will always be my hero. It is rare and special when your hero is also your friend and your shipmate. Steinbeck wrote once of a fictional hero. This man drives himself and is driven. It is impossible to see how he can do so much, can cover so much ground, can be so effective. There's a man. there is really a man. Of Admiral Boorda, we all exclaim today, there was a sailor. There really was a sailor. Shipmates, a lot of work is well begun, and in the Boorda way of doing business, well begun is half done. Our charge today is clear. Carry on. Lead with zeal. Serve with pride. Learn about and honor our heritage. That will be the Admiral Boorda legacy and the only really fitting memorial, and with it will come the strength to carry on. God bless you, Admiral Boorda. We love you. We will forever miss you. Will you join me now in the responsive reading of the psalm? God is our refuge and strength. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth be moved, though its waters rage and foam. The Lord of hosts is with us. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God. God is in the midst of her. She shall not be overthrown. The nations make much ado, and the kingdoms are shaken. The Lord of hosts is with us. Come now and look upon the works of the Lord. It is he who makes war to cease in all the world. Be still then and know that I am God. The Lord of hosts is with us.
They that go down to the sea in ships, that do business in great waters, they shall see the works of the Lord. Today we mourn the loss of an American who loved to go down to the sea in ships, who did business in great waters in the service of peace and freedom, and who will see the works of the Lord. His name was Admiral Jeremy Boorda, Mike to all who knew him. It has been said several times today, but it is worth saying again, that Mike was a sailor's sailor, the first seaman recruit to become the Chief of Naval Operations, a Navy man who at every stage of his career put the interests of sailors and their families first. A Navy leader who helped make America's Navy the best that the world has ever seen. And a family man who deeply loved his wife Betty and their children. As Secretary of Defense, I relied on Mike's advice. Indeed, we first met during a security crisis when the Bosnian Serbs began shelling Sarajevo in defiance of a NATO ultimatum. As we weighed the Allied response, Mike's advice, respond with force, carried the day. And it was Mike's combat leadership that directed the airstrikes that stopped the killing and started Bosnia on a path to peace. In his wise stewardship of the Navy, Mike carried on the legacy of his predecessor and role model, the late Admiral Arleigh Burke. Like any great leader, Mike's heart was with his people. He was a seaman who became an admiral, but an admiral who never forgot the seamen. And nobody had more pride in his sailors. The hallmark of Mike's remarkable Navy career was a heartfelt recognition that no ship, no battle group is better than the people who sail it. He knew we cannot send our ships on extended overseas deployments without also having sophisticated and well-trained hire and meet and talk with some of the men and women who were manning that ship. One senior petty officer that I met had volunteered to delay her retirement for the chance to be among the first women to deploy on a combat ship. When I met with her, I asked her why she had extended. She told me that in her 20 years in the Navy, she had always been assigned to shore duty or with supply ships. And she wanted to have at least one tour on a Navy warship because she wanted to be able to tell her grandchildren that she had been a real sailor. That's what our Navy consists of today, real sailors. And this is the Navy that Mike built. Last month, in his annual State of the Navy address, Mike Boorda talked about some of the difficult challenges facing the modern Navy. But he concluded by saying, "Do we have the best Navy in the world? You can count on it." And under Mike's leadership, I did count on it. I'd like to close my remarks by expressing a hope and a prayer for his family and for Mike's colleagues in the Navy. To his colleagues, my hope and prayer is that you will work to preserve his memory, to pursue his legacy, and persevere in the quest to sustain and strengthen the Navy that Mike loved. To his family, my hope is that your pain will be relieved by the grace of God. This wish was expressed beautifully more than 2,000 years ago by the Greek poet Aeschylus, who wrote, "In our sleep, pain that cannot forget falls drop by drop upon the heart, until in our despair, against our will, comes wisdom through the awful grace of God."
Mrs. Boorda, Mike's family, Secretary Christopher and our friends from the Diplomatic Corps, Secretary Perry, Secretary Dalton, General Shalikashvili, members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Unified Commanders-in-Chief, to the leadership and members of Congress who are here, Admiral Johnson and the flag leadership of our Navy, Master Chief Petty Officer of the Navy Hagen, to our great Navy sailors and all of America's armed forces. Today we come to honor and give thanks for the life of Mike Boorda, a special man who earned a special place in the heart of his Navy and the heart of our nation. He lived a life that makes America proud, beginning, of course, with his family. His first words upon becoming Chief of Naval Operations were, "I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Betty, and I wouldn't want to be here without her." To Betty and David and Edward and Anna and your families, I know there is nothing we can say or do to ease the loss of your husband and father and grandfather. I hope you find comfort in the love and respect and honor that surrounds you today here in this great cathedral and all throughout our great land. I thank you for your service to the Navy. I thank you, Betty. I thank you, Edward and Robert, for your service. I thank you, David, for your work on the radio. I thank you, Anna, for your devotion and for your husband's service, and Edward for your wife's service. But your entire family is a model, a reflection of Mike Boorda's remarkable love for the Navy, a Navy in which he enlisted when he was just 16. When he was first in his class at Personnel Man School in San Diego, he was offered his choice of assignments. Displaying his characteristic compassion, he traded a slot with a friend whose wife was sick and expecting a baby. So the friend got to stay in San Diego, and Mike got shipped to Oklahoma. Oklahoma's coastline leaves something to be desired for people to design a career in the Navy. But it turned out to be a first-rate assignment because that's where he met Betty. He was commissioned an officer in 1962. Then his star rose fast and bright with important assignments from weapons officer aboard destroyers to Chief of Naval Personnel to Commander-in-Chief of our naval forces in Europe and SINC of the Southern Command. And as all of you know, 2 years ago, just last month, he became the very first enlisted man in the entire history of the United States Navy to be the Chief of Naval Operations. At every turn, he led in helping us, our country, live up to its responsibilities as the world's leading force for freedom. He served 2 tours of duty in Southeast Asia. As has been said today, as Commander-in-Chief of Allied forces in Southern Europe, he ordered the first offensive action in NATO's history, the strikes against Bosnian Serb aircraft violating the no-fly zone. I know his family is especially proud of the role he played and the role that they supported in getting food and relief to the war-torn people of Bosnia. I very much want history to record that Mike Boorda's quiet determination to do all we could do to end the slaughter of the children and the innocents in Bosnia and to bring that awful war to an end had a profound impact on his president and on the policy of this nation. Even after he became Chief of Naval Operations, I continued to ask him what he thought we should do to get a reality check on the rest of the advice I was given. And I want to say to all of you what I said to his family this last weekend. It is my belief that perhaps more than any other military officer in this country, Mike Boorda, helped to lead us to the point of peace at Dayton. And there are countless thousands of people alive in Bosnia today because of this small man with a big heart, a large vision, and great courage. He developed new strategies to carry our Navy into the 21st century. He spearheaded projects like theater ballistic missile defense and the Arsenal ship that have put our Navy on the cutting edge of technology. Like all great sailors, he loved the sea, and he loves sea stories. The stories about him are legend and now legend. I'm told that when I nominated him to be the Chief of Naval Operations, he called his mother, Trudy Wallace, from Italy to tell her that he was about to become the CNO. She asked if it was a promotion. He said, "No, I'm already a 4-star admiral." She asked if he were going to get a raise. He said, "No, I'll be making a little less. I'm losing my overseas living allowance." She then said, "Well, surely you'll get a bigger house." And he said, "Actually, it'll be smaller than the Mediterranean villa we have now." Apparently, his mother then said, "Well, don't you have enough time in to retire?" Now, every family's got a story like that. Well, he didn't get a raise or a promotion or a bigger house, but he got a bigger job. And he did his mother and his family and his country proud. Many have said before me that his lasting legacy will be his concern for the sailors. He knew the people were the Navy's greatest asset, and every day he made the Navy stronger because he took good care of its sailors. He loved the Blue Jackets and he loved the officers. When he came on board a ship or entered a room of sailors, you could see the twinkle in his eye. Without ever ranting or reprimanding, criticizing or cajoling, he found a way to bring out the best in everyone, seaman or admiral, boatswain's mate to battle group commander. Talk to him for just a few moments and you couldn't help but like him. You couldn't help but love our Navy even more and want to do the best you could for our country. He also understood that beyond the things that he fought for that were material for our men and women in uniform, beyond the better housing, the better pay, the better time at home with families, there was above all the importance of caring and compassion. Last year in Norfolk, he spoke to a theater full of sailors. The chief machinist mate nervously stepped up to the microphone and explained his predicament. His wife had recently passed away, and he was left with 2 young daughters. He told the CNO that he had 6 months before his retirement date, but he would have to re-enlist before then, and that meant more sea duty and separation from his children. Right there at the mic, the CNO asked, "So you want to retire in June?" The MMC meekly replied, "Yes, sir." And right then and there, Admiral Boorda said, "Your request is approved. We'll work it out." The Admiral used to joke about being small in stature. Shortly after I named him Chief of Naval Operations, we were in the English Channel together celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Normandy invasion on the aircraft carrier, the George Washington. And I spoke just as I am now, but I had the presidential lectern there, and when I finished, he was coming up, so I pulled out the stand for him to stand on. And he got up and looked at me and he said, "You know, this is the second time you've elevated me in the last couple of months." Well, that's the kind of sense of humor he had. But even though he was very small, the rest of us always looked up to him. Looked up to his ability somehow to inspire us all to do better, to reach beyond ourselves. There was reported in the press a Navy photographer's remarks I would like to repeat, who said everyone was always asking me to take photos with him. They wanted to stand next to the best thing the Navy had. Before I came over here today, I visited the Pentagon. And I went to the Navy Command Center, to the briefing room that Admiral Boorda began his day in several times a week, to thank the staff who worked with him every day and who can't be with us here today because they're on duty, as he would want them to be. And they were encouraged to tell me whatever they want. I thought you might be interested to know what those people who are now over at the Pentagon doing the work they did every day for Mike Boorda had to say to me. One said, "There's a $5 bill over there on the wall. Do you see it, Mr. President?" I said, "Yes, I did." He said, "That's the bet the Admiral had with the weatherman every time we had a briefing. He always bet against the weatherman. And as of the last bet, he was $5 ahead." Another said that every time there was a briefing in the morning, he brought in strips of bacon and literally shoved bacon at everyone else. He was always trying to share his bacon and make people laugh about it. A third said that the thing that meant the most to her was that at Christmas time, he literally greeted every single sailor in the Pentagon. No matter how much time it took, that's what he did. A young sailor in the office said that the thing that moved her most was that she handled his correspondence and he would never let her send a form letter. Even when someone wrote to him and went outside the chain of command, he would write a gentle letter back explaining what the chain of command was, but it was always a personal letter, so that the young sailor who wrote would know that the CNO really cared and really read the letter. And finally, one very large African-American sailor from the state of Tennessee stood up in the back of the room and he said, "Mr. President, how can we ever replace this man?" In the Bible, there is the great story of two warriors and friends, David and Jonathan. When they prepared to part, Jonathan said, "Tomorrow there is a new moon, and thou shalt be missed, because thy seat will be empty." Mike Boorda's seat is empty, and how we shall miss his warm smile, his easy manner, his wonderful voice, his sharp wit. What a legacy he has left behind. His ferocious devotion to all of you, his commitment to give all of you a chance to be the very best that you can be, to give our country its chance for true greatness, his deep sense of honor, which no person should ever question, and a Navy that is, for all of its challenges, the finest in the world. Now Mike Boorda's ship is moored. His voyage is complete. But I know when the whistle blew and the colors were shifted, he was welcomed on the pier by God's loving, eternal embrace. May God bless and cherish Admiral Mike Boorda as he blessed and cherished our lives and our beloved America.
speakers far more eloquent and inspired have memorialized Admiral Jeremy Michael Boorda, the Chief of Naval Operations, United States Navy. From their words, a portrait has been prepared about the man whose life we celebrate as we mourn his passing. The images are vivid. Devoted husband of Betty, a best friend and father of David, Ed and Brenda, Anna and Robert, Bob and Dina. The doting and adored grandfather of 11 beautiful children whom he loved with a passion. We saw, in the words of our speakers, the man who was people-oriented, who was, to repeat again and again and again, a sailor's sailor. The man who went from seaman recruit to four-star admiral. The man who in a few short years wrought great changes within the Navy that he led and that he loved. And we glimpsed a view of the man who is so sensitive to the needs of others that he often personally, quietly attended to solving problems, the problems of sailors and of their families across the country and around the world. He was never too busy to help another human being. This man, Mike Boorda, grievously mourned by his family, has also left an aching void in the hearts of the men and the women of the United States Navy. We mourn him, this shipmate of ours. And as we mourn him, we try to find meaning in the events of the past week, to find answers so that we can understand, and then get on with the work of healing our aching hearts. It is hard to find reason in the irrational events of the past few days. We may never know the answers to our questions, but that does not mean that we will not learn from this tragedy. Perhaps, in order to better understand, we ought to again look at the man, Mike Boorda. Ask around, go to people, to those who knew him, and see what are some of the attributes that are used to describe him. I did. I learned a great deal about him, and I think that I have found a way in which we can cope. The first word that comes to the fore when asking about the character of Mike Boorda is integrity. His name and his reputation were very precious to him. He had devoted his adult life to fashioning a good name. His word was his bond, and he could be trusted. A good name is like a golden crown. It gleams, it glows. It gives off a radiance that reassures those of us who bask in its light. One feels confident in dealing with a person of integrity. No matter what some may say, no one can tarnish the crown of the good name that Mike Boorda fashioned in his lifetime. His devotion to honesty is a goal to which all of us can strive to achieve. The second characteristic that marks Mike Boorda was, of course, his profound concern for other human beings. He came up the ranks the hard way. He was able to succeed in part because there were others who cared for him. He learned firsthand the positive impact that others may have on one's life. And he, in turn, developed a sixth sense that enabled him to help others when they had need of his support. That is why he was a people person. He cared. The third characteristic of Mike Boorda was his deep and profound and abiding love for this Navy. He loved the Navy more than life itself. He loved the people that comprise the Navy. The Navy, its ships and its stations, its institutions and its customs. But more than that, it is the people, the sailors and the civilians, the admirals and the chiefs. They all infused every fiber in his body. The lesson is obvious. Mike is no longer with us. The physical body. Mike Boorda also lives on in the memories of those who knew and who loved him. His wife Betty and their children and grandchildren have precious memories that keep the beauty of his life burning brightly. And we who were his troops have memories that can never be extinguished. But we can do more to keep him alive by practicing what he did in his all too brief stay here on earth. We have the opportunity to dedicate ourselves to making our names good names, to being honest in all our duties and in all our dealings with others, and in keeping our integrity as a prized possession. Protect it from becoming tarnished. In emulating the care and sensitivity of Mike Boorda, we have the chance to commit ourselves to being receptive to the needs of others and the problems within our society. The world is much too small for us to ignore the silent cries of those in pain. But if we do not cultivate our sense of hearing to be aware of those around us, we will fail. Hearing alone is not sufficient. Action is required. Once we know that there is a problem, it is incumbent upon us to respond and to help. And finally, be devoted, sailors, to the Navy. Uphold its tradition, maintain its customs, and above all, be proud to be a sailor, to wear the uniform. As Moses' life drew to its conclusion, Moses passed on the mantle of leadership to Joshua, Joshua, the next commander-in-chief. Standing before the people, Moses placed his hands on the shoulders of Joshua. And with outstretched arms, Moses said, "Chazak ve'amatz," be strong and of good courage. God later added to this charge the following: do not be afraid, for I, the Lord your God, will be with you. Mike Boorda would echo these words as he would charge us to be strong, chazak, and to be of good courage, amatz. God is with us now as we begin the process of healing. We need not fear, for God's protecting love abounds within this world in which we live, as Mike Boorda exemplified in his life. It is within our hearts and our minds, in our daily lives, in our very being. Amen.
Let us give thanks to God for this land, with all of its chartered liberties, for all the wonder of our country's story.
We give you thanks, God.
For leaders in nation and state, and for those who in days past and in these present times have labored for the Commonwealth.
We give you thanks, God.
For those who in all times and places have been true and brave, and who have lived upright lives and served their fellows.
We give you thanks, God.
For those who served their country in her hour of need, and especially those who gave their lives in that service.
We give you thanks, God.
O Almighty God and most merciful Father, as we remember with gratitude your servant Admiral Michael Boorda, we reverently memorialize his courage and strength, his vision and commitment to this nation and its course toward peace. Quiet our hearts with the stillness of a wise trust in you, as we hold before you those who mourn. Look upon your bereaved children with your mercy, and bring them the consolation of your loving presence.
The Lord shall set Zion free.
The Lord will do great things for us.
Then laughter will fill our mouths.
And our tongues will shout for joy.
Those who sow with tears
will reap with songs of joy.
Those who go out weeping, carrying the seed
will come again with joy, shouldering the sheaves.
The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Let us pray. God of all mercy and comfort, with you there is compassion and plenteous redemption. Receive into your gracious keeping the soul of our brother Michael. Grant him your saving grace, your eternal light, your everlasting peace, that he may live forever in the fullness of your love.
Blessed be God forever.
The Lord bless you and keep you.
Amen.
The Lord make his face to shine upon you and give you peace.
Amen.
The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace and be gracious unto you now and forevermore.
Let us bless the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
attentions so required, on his well-timed sense of humor. Every evening we would call each other, he from Italy and I from Belgium. Mike always had the right solution and always the right word to cheer me on. And soon, I became addicted to his calls and to his friendship. And it was always a special treat when Joni and I
The words of the prophet Micah have been read. O man, what does the Lord require of you? But to do justly, love mercy, and to walk humbly with your and peacemaker, a planner, a superb tactician, a brilliant strategist, a warm, caring sailor who loves men and women in that Navy uniform. That's the Mike Boorda I will always remember. Bless his wonderful family and bless his Navy that he loved.
A reading from Revelation. Then I saw
anyone could believe possible. And all the while, he envisioned even greater things to do by and by, and he shared his dreams with sailors. We will long remember Admiral Boorda for many great achievements, but I pray today we will also remember the details. He didn't just shake a sailor's hand. He gripped it and held it, and he drew energy from the encounter. Though it's water, the Lord of hosts is with us. She shall not be overthrown. The nations make much ado, and the kingdoms are shaken. The Lord of hosts is with us. Come now and look upon the works of the Lord.
And well-trained people with good morale. It is a tribute to Mike's leadership that our Navy today has such people. Their dedication and pride never fail to impress me everywhere that I meet them, on bases in the United States, on bases overseas, and on ships at sea. Shortly after Mike had arranged to open up women serving on combat vessels, he arranged for me to go to
great Navy sailors in all of America's armed forces. Today we come to honor and give thanks for the life of Mike Boorda, a special man who earned a special place in the heart of his Navy and the heart of the Navy. I thank you, Betty. I thank you, Edward and Robert, for your service. I thank you, David, for your work on the radio. I thank you, Anna, for your devotion and for your husband's service, and Edward for your wife's service. But the very best that you can be to give our country its chance for true greatness. His deep sense of honor, which no person should ever question. And a Navy that is, for all of its challenges, the finest in the world. Now Mike Boorda's ship is moored as he blessed and cherished our lives and our beloved America.
Thank you.